Well, ladies and gentlemen, you are about to become under the influence of an award-winning lifelong advertising man. He hosts, creates his own radio show podcast called Under the Influence, and it's based on looking at the world through a marketer's eyes, an ad man's eyes. He began his career as a copy chief for a radio station where he discovered, and now I'm quoting, that with meticulous planning and attention to detail, you can fall flat on your face. And now he has written a book about all of this. Terry O'Reilly, ladies and gentlemen, My Biggest Mistake, Epic Fails and Silver Linings. It is such a great book because we all learn from failure.
So true. So true. Hello, Pamela.
It's great to have you here. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and I just have to tell people, for those who actually are regular viewers or listeners to your podcast and radio show, you're in the Airstream where you record and create all of this product.
I am. It's a 1969 Airstream trailer, restored and converted to be a recording studio.
Just fabulous. I'm so jealous. All right, let's jump in. From the back cover of this latest book of yours, people will always make mistakes. When you feel like you may have lost your credibility, your livelihood, or even your sanity, it might be destiny preparing you for what you've asked for all along. Just remember to ask one question: what is the hidden gift?
Right.
Is this personal experience speaking there, Mr. O'Reilly?
Well, I did. When I look back on my career, Pamela, I was lucky enough not to make any catastrophic career decisions, which that book is based on, by the way. I really tried to look for people who made catastrophic decisions, and it ended up being the best thing that ever happened to them. But when I look back on my career, early on, when I was a young writer in my 20s, I did have a job where the creative director at the agency I worked for hated all my work. He hated everything. I always say that he booed my car in the parking lot. Like, he never allowed one piece of creativity to get through. And it was very hard on me. And I was there for about 2 years. And when I got out of that place into my next job, I really thought I had wasted 2 very important years of my career. But skip ahead about 7 years or so, when I started my own company, I realized that one of the best pieces of learning I had was those 2 years, because I learned how not to do it.
Yeah.
So I learned how to encourage creativity and support my staff and take calculated risks, all based on watching somebody never do that.
Yeah.
So what I thought was my biggest mistake ended up being my best mistake.
I agree 1,000%. Getting fired has turned out to be the best thing, led me to start my own company, all of those things. So I get it totally. The people you talk about in the book, and I want to get to some of the larger issues, but this book has fun stories. I mean, Denny Doherty, I know as well, from Mamas and Papas Are Dead, and Bill Maher, Dixie Chicks, Ellen DeGeneres, people that you worked with, like Ellen, people who made mistakes, but were able to pull it back. What's your favorite out of all of those?
Ooh, good question. One of the very first chapter is about Jaws and Steven Spielberg. And I love that story and I put it first because it really sums up the core of the book. And that story, very briefly, of course, is that Spielberg was a 27-year-old director looking for his first big break, and he lands Jaws, the film, which is huge. Because he's young and he's full of bravado, he wants to shoot it in the ocean with a full-size shark, an animatronic shark. So he has 3 of them built because he needs 3 of them to pull this off. He tests it in freshwater tanks in Hollywood. It looks like it's all working. He goes out to Martha's Vineyard, puts them in the water, and they sink and malfunction immediately. And the mistake he made, of course, was he never tested them in salt water.
Salt water, right.
Which I don't think a lot of people know. Everybody knows the sharks didn't work, but I don't think everybody knows why.
Yeah.
But that ended up being a hidden gift, because as he panicked in his hotel room one night with no working shark, all his crew, all his cast, there with no working script, he asked himself that really great question, which was, what would Hitchcock do?
Right.
And when he reframed the problem like that, he came up with the solution that what we can't see is the most terrifying thing of all. So he quickly rewrote the script so we don't see the shark. And if you think about it, he implied the shark. So you see the dorsal fin and the tail going through the water, right. So you get a sense of how big it is. Or that famous scene where the shark pulls those yellow barrels, you see how powerful it is. And then, of course, John Williams' fantastic score where, you hear the music come in and then the music would recede, but you'd never see the shark. And the most amazing thing, I think, Pamela, is we only see the full-length shark for 4 minutes in that film.
It is incredible.
You've seen it the whole time, right?
People have lifelong fears of these creatures that they've never seen.
I know. And that was, I think, a great example of a catastrophic mistake turning into the best thing that ever happened. And even Spielberg says that the malfunctioning shark added probably $175 million to the box office.
Yeah, amazing. A lot of the stories that you recount in the book are, and I think it just reflects our modern times, when culture and fame meet political correctness or politics. So the Dixie Chicks on foreign soil criticize George Bush and say they're ashamed he comes from Texas. Ellen DeGeneres struggling with whether she allows her character to come out on a television show before she comes out as gay. And the fights with the networks and all the rest of it. Even Brian Williams, to a certain extent, a very well-known NBC anchor who kind of pads his resume a little bit, just beefs up the war stories. There just seems to be a lot of that. That's when people hit the wall or have the problem.
Yeah, it's very true. And I think the key thing, the connective tissue between even those three people you mentioned, Pamela, is that they muscled through the problem.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people run away when they have a catastrophic or humiliating thing happen to them. They tend to give up on their pursuits and they disappear and hope for a quiet life somewhere else. But those people in that book and Brian Williams and Ellen DeGeneres, et cetera, they kind of muscled through it. They owned up. I mean, in Ellen's, she calls it a mistake. That was her words, not mine.
Yeah.
Brian did pad his resume, et cetera. But they muscled through it and got out the other side. And, Ellen ended up with the best thing that ever happened to her, which was her talk show. And Brian Williams, although he recently left his MSNBC show, I thought he found his groove there. He
Absolutely.
could be funny and erudite and keep 4 conversations going at a time, which was much more fun for him than just reading a teleprompter every evening at 6 o'clock.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think they found their hidden gift.
And I love the Rob Lowe story because I'm a big fan. And there he is back on, doing his own television show again after all these crises. And one of those typical stories, he got into a lot of trouble when he was young and inexperienced and did drugs and drank too much and almost hit bottom. And it scared the hell out of him.
It did scare the hell out of him. And comedy saved his career. It was really when Hollywood stopped calling him after that sex tape came out. It was one of the first scandalous celebrity sex tapes back then, even pre-videotape machines. Like it went back, even predated that. And Hollywood stopped calling him Pamela's, and he sat there, which is every actor's nightmare, is no calls. And then Lorne Michaels calls him and says, "Come and host Saturday Night Live." And Rob knew at that moment that he was going to be made fun of, that was Lorne Michaels' intent. And everybody told him not to do it. His management, his agent said, "Don't do it." He did it anyway. And it salvaged his career because Lorne Michaels met him. Mike Myers met him. They put him in a couple of funny movies. And then he found out he was had a very humorous, persona he could take on. And it was a Lazarus moment for him.
Yeah, exactly. Know a little bit about that. The other issue that, there's so many, I mean, we could talk for 4 days here, but there's so many things that ring true today. Now, I've been listening to your show for a long time. So there's the Black Pearl story, which I really like because to me, it rings true for politics. It's a something from nothing story,
right?
And it just tell people a little bit about that.
I have to throw my mind back to that episode now. So black pearls were not a valuable commodity back then. They weren't
Right.
white pearls. White pearls were what everybody wanted. So this person who thought he could actually create a market around black pearls, and what he did was he gave them to a big jeweler who then put them in the window with other fine jewelry. So in other words, he was almost borrowing the prestige from other jewelry to put onto the black pearls to make them feel valuable and desirable. And by doing that, I'm really, giving you the 25-word essay.
No, because it's a great story. But
but he made them so valuable that everybody wanted them. And he started in Hollywood. And when actors and actresses started wearing black pearls, they became a valuable commodity. But they were literally worthless prior to the marketing strategy of treating them with a lot of attention, putting them in the window with other valuable and jewelry. And I always say that prestige has to be borrowed. You can't kind of create prestige. Something has to lend you its prestige. And the other pearls and other diamonds, et cetera, did that.
And that's like, it's one of the things, of course, I tend to see the world through that prism, but that's what happens in the world of politics with endorsement. Justin Trudeau was in a bit of trouble in the last election. Barack Obama puts out a tweet and it kind of changes the game.
Yeah, it was really, you're right. It's the same principle at work there, isn't it?
Yeah.
That you're not, maybe it wasn't prestige in Obama's case, but it was just an endorsement. But yeah, the very same principle at work.
You talk a lot about the priceless to the worthless and vice versa. If you go and steal a famous painting, the downside is it's worth bazillions of dollars, but you can't sell it to anybody.
Can't sell it.
And so you're stuck with looking at it yourself. But that principle is pretty key in terms of creativity in our culture, not just in movies or fame, but in creating products. You tell these stories about value by accident, the rubber band, Fanta, Velveeta cheese, charcoal briquettes. Pick a little story and explain to our listeners.
Well, yeah. So charcoal briquettes. So Henry Ford, he was quite the entrepreneur when you dig into his history, by the way. So he needed wood as part of building his Model Ts. And he bought a huge like thousands of acres of land, I think it was somewhere in Michigan, so he could harvest his own wood. And he created a sawmill. Like he even wanted to control rubber. Like he bought a rubber plantation down in South America because he wanted to control every aspect of his supply chain. When he went to visit the sawmill, he noticed that there was a lot of wood on the ground. Like, in other words, the ends that they would cut off to make the longer lengths of wood. And he thought there was money to be made out of the castaway thing. So he really created charcoal out of all those various pieces, and it became I think it was Kingsford Charcoal was the name of the brand, and he literally made millions of dollars off of the refuse, off of the garbage that the wood that they didn't need.
And they associated it with the vehicle, because with the vehicle, you could go for a drive. You could get out in the country and have a barbecue.
So that was such a key part of the strategy, was to link it to automobiles. It's like Michelin, it's the same kind of story, Pamela, where the Michelin needed people to drive so they would wear their tires out, because at that time, very few people had cars and they weren't really using them that much. There weren't that many roads. So what the Michelin company did was create the Michelin Guide to Restaurants. So people would actually drive to the restaurants and use their tires. So it was really just a strategy to make people get in their cars.
The people that you cite, I mean, and IKEA is the same kind of story. I mean, he started out as an entrepreneur at the age of 7, but he was cheap. I mean, he was building furniture out of, little leftover pieces of wood, etc. The same with Fanta, the orange drink, which didn't start at that. It was using, crushed and mushed apples and old fruit. It was just in wartime. So you didn't want to waste anything. What is in their mind? Like, what separates the creative mind from the rest of us who go, damn, I wish I'd thought of that.
So hard to answer that question. It's Malcolm Gladwell has this interesting theory that I subscribe to. See, I've been an entrepreneur since I was 29, so I can really understand this. The conventional wisdom is that entrepreneurs have this high tolerance for risk. Mm-hmm. What Malcolm Gladwell says is it's not that, is that every entrepreneur feels in their bones that they're onto a sure thing. And when I started my company, I felt the same way too. I felt there was a big chunk of the market not being serviced, that I could get in there, elbow my way in and give a better level of service. And then the other aspect to that, I guess, is that entrepreneurs look at the world in a different way. There's something about them where Henry Ford can look on the ground, see scrap and see a profit potential. Or the Michelin brothers knowing that if they could just get people in cars, that they could sell more tires and give them a reason to drive. Like there's that curiosity, I think, is probably the foremost characteristic of great entrepreneurs, is they're just endlessly curious about the world.
Because it's so easy to dismiss it as greed. There was something they could get for nothing and sell. And of course, we do know entrepreneurs like that. Yeah. But there is something else that moves them, and that desire to win, to be different, to be at the front of the line, and not necessarily in an egotistical way, to just break ground.
It's ingenuity too. Yeah. It's just, every entrepreneur looks for opportunity. It's really, that's the name of the game. And you have to keep evolving too as an entrepreneur. Even that little evolution that Henry Ford made to get into the charcoal business, that little left turn at Albuquerque, that he made right there. I think that is just ingenuity. It's just looking for opportunity.
We can't have a discussion about marketing and advertising and influence in the age of COVID without talking about just that, as you have.
With everyone on Zoom, people were suddenly seeing their own faces front and center on Zoom screens. As a rule, we don't see ourselves when conversing with others. Zoom has changed all that, and a lot of people didn't like what they saw. Droopy faces, lines, and wrinkles. Many people were more bothered by those lines on video than in real life. That phenomenon triggered a boom in plastic surgery. Injectable procedures like Botox and fillers are up 90%.
So the story is priceless, Terry, that in all times of crisis, lipstick, people want to doll themselves up. But when you have to spend your life on Zoom, all of a sudden you want to rearrange the bits on the face. Tell us a little bit about, I'm sure that surprised even you.
It did surprise me. When the whole world went to Zoom, we all just adapted to that, but there was a lot of implications for that. So, when you're behind a mask, that had implications where people weren't, literally, buying a lot of cosmetic products suddenly. Yeah. I think my whole industry is really still grappling with COVID and what to do about it. Because, if someone says to you they have a crystal ball and knows how this is all going to turn out, there's no way they can, because it changes every single week. So I think there's a lot of change that's still going to happen in the marketing world because of COVID. There's no doubt about it. Even the way stores handle their customers in this era, where masks suddenly come down, but should I put my mask on to go in? Right. How many people do you let into your establishment? The poor restaurants hanging on by their fingernails. There's a lot going on.
The news of the day and the speed. We don't need to talk about the impact of internet and social media. We kind of know that in our bones. But when you have such massive, catastrophic, major events happening so quickly, and I'm thinking, of course, of Ukraine and the way that has impacted people, and how Zelensky, and I don't want to be trite about this at all, but that man has been a genius at connecting with people so that we hear him and get his story.
He is brilliant at that. And even when was it on the Oscars he made an appeal? Did he make an appeal? Am I right about that?
It was the Grammys. Yeah.
The Grammys. Sorry. You're right. You are. even to choose the Grammys
Yeah.
as a communication vehicle was astounding to me. Yeah, he really, one of his gifts is connecting. Maybe it's because he was an actor, and actors know how to do that. And I don't mean that facetiously, because I've worked with actors my whole career. They have this gift for doing that. And I think he is leveraging that because he has to.
Yeah.
When you look at him, I mean, he's under siege, and none of the big countries can really help him because it would escalate. It's a crazy situation to be in. And I think he's handling it pretty wonderfully. That he's got all of our hearts, doesn't he? He's
that's the point. There are just individuals who can rise to the moment.
Yeah. And
he's doing that. Now, I think the rest of us all feel hopeless and helpless because we all want more to be done, and we don't know really we could do, although, we could send more in, but as you say, great risk with that. Yeah. The other thing recently, of course, was watching Boris Johnson go and visit. I mean, here's this kind of in political context in Britain, he's kind of a buffoon, a bit of a clown, but he gets, even with his suit and tie walking down the street, it was a huge connector.
Yeah, I was surprised to see that, to tell you the truth. I was surprised any leader would risk that trip now.
Right.
And that surprised me about Boris. That was an interesting move on his behalf.
Yeah. And I think spoke for a lot of people, which is we have to put our money where our mouth is, right? And take some of the chances. So other things that are going on like that, the slap at the Oscars, obviously that's going to affect a career. When we were talking a little bit about, turning things around, what does Will Smith have to do?
That's a very interesting thing we all witnessed there. This weekend, Pamela, I was boiling some maple syrup at a friend's place not far from here.
Oh my goodness, how Canadian of you.
I know, it was the ultimate Canadian moment. And comedian Ron James was there with us. And I've known Ron for many years. We've done many commercials together. But I asked Ron that question. I said, Will, are you afraid now? Are you afraid to be in a club, say something, mildly offensive or whatever, and have somebody actually do a Will Smith on you? And he said he wasn't concerned about that. But I've read, even Kathy Griffin said on Twitter not long ago, she's afraid of that. Yeah. It's funny how moments like that can change the zeitgeist, can open up the door to something that, you would never think in a million years could happen. And a lot of people will walk through that door and say, I'm going to slap a comedian. Right. Yeah. It's like, you don't want to get into the Trump story, but Trump opened up a lot of doors too for unusual behavior. Right. Yeah.
And saying things that, has probably turned social media more negative more quickly than it probably was going anyway, but he may put the gas on.
And, I always say too, Pamela, which is a surprising thing, but I've said it often in my show, that whoever's in the White House dictates the tone of marketing.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting thing because you don't ever really connect those two. But if you look back, there was no humor in the Bush years at all, very conservative marketing. If you look at the Super Bowl ads during the Bush years, very conservative. There was humor during the Clinton years. That was just the tone. Yeah. There was humor during the Obama years in marketing. You sort of see that tone filter down. And then in the Trump years, it was a whole different thing going on where actual brands had to state which side of the fence they were on. And that's something that brands never did historically for 100 years, is really state your political affiliation for the fear that you're going to lose the other 50%. But they were forced to sort of say, here's where we stand. So the White House dictates marketing. It's an interesting phenomenon.
People are marching for some very serious reasons and standing up for their beliefs more than ever today. Many viewers were outraged that Pepsi would co-opt meaningful protests as a commercial theme. Many couldn't believe Pepsi would cast Kendall Jenner in a protest storyline, saying she had zero credibility. Nor could people actually believe Pepsi would cast its own product in a role where it saves the day against a possible clash with police. The link between protesting and the product was non-existent. Pepsi yanked the spot within hours. Social media rained down on the soda company with a vengeance. Everything about the commercial seemed tone deaf. Add to that the fact it was released on the anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King, prompting his daughter Bernice to tweet a photo of her father being pushed back by police, adding, "If only Daddy would have known about the power of Pepsi."
So we've just taken a look, heard you here on the Pepsi ad being tone deaf, I think, to kind of, we are now living in that woke world where you have to be, I don't know, anticipatory doesn't even come close. You have to think through how 15 different communities and groups may or may not respond to this and what kind of sway they'll have. Advertising, marketing in the woke world is really tricky territory.
It's so tricky right now. And I get it. I get that heat too on my show sometimes.
I bet.
Recently, I said, I posted a photo of in the Airstream here, in the Airstream, and I had my daughter's dog just sitting beside me, just watching me record a show all day. And I just tweeted a photo of him, and I said, getting a lot of comments from the peanut gallery. And I got pushback on that because apparently peanut gallery is a racist term. And I had no idea.
I have no idea.
Yeah, I had no idea about that. So there's a lot of learning to be had in all of us, I think. There's no doubt about that.
You were talking about sort of editing the past and the future in one of your programs. You used the Golden Girls story. So if for people who are too young, three aging women and their mother, one of their mothers, live together in a house, and the son of one of them comes home with his Black girlfriend and greeted at the door by two of these women who have got mud facial scrubs on, which was probably hysterical at the time, but it now it can't go forward. It can't even be in the archives.
Yeah, because they made some funny comments, just in that moment of meeting a fiance who was Black. They weren't anticipating a Black person to walk through the door. Then they had mud packs on, and they had some repartee there. And then that episode was pulled. Like, you cannot find that episode now in any reruns of the Golden Girls. It's literally had to have been vanquished from the archive.
What do you make of that? I mean, we're going through it in the larger sense too, of taking down statues or renaming buildings or whatever it is. It is our past. It is our history. It's a time and place, which in fact all ads are, all television programs are. They represent, we're not soaking our nails in palm olive dish soap anymore either, right?
Right.
But it does give us a window into that world.
Well, advertising really is catching the pop culture in amber. It really, even Marshall McLuhan said it's the cave art of our time. He had that great line, and it's really is that when you look back at advertising really reflects. That's really what we do, is reflect what's going on. We rarely lead the parade. We kind of put our finger in the wind and then, jump on that bandwagon. And I think, it's an interesting thing that even if our archive, so this is my 17th year on CBC. Yep. So we have a pretty vast archive that we've made available to our listeners, but I didn't go in and change anything. I literally just said, this is from season, 4 in 2007. And I want people to know that was the reflection of the time. I didn't want to go back in and start changing the whole archive. I just wanted them to know it's time stamped.
That's the thing. I mean, you're talking about presidents, in the years after 9/11, everybody was struggling. Comedians were struggling. When is too soon? What can we say? Right. It changed the stage on which we were all doing our jobs, or literally for some performing.
Yeah, that's so true. And then Giuliani, of all people, had the funniest line of all on Saturday Night Live. Do you remember when they finally came back after 9/11, the first show? Yeah. And Lorne Michaels said at the beginning, "Can we be funny?" And Giuliani said, "Why start now?" Which is such a funny line from, Giuliani of all people. But it was literally that issue. Is it even appropriate to be funny anymore? Yeah.
And that's, I think, the things that we all struggle with, because here we are and, and we watch the Oscars and the Grammys and everybody else try to find that line when they're all dressed up in their outfits and drinking champagne and celebrating movies like first world issues, while we're in that context. So it's always a struggle.
It is always a struggle. And I think the 21st century more than ever. When you look at just the 22-year history we've had in this century, it's one knockout punch after another.
Yeah.
It really is. Even having a business thrive, going through 9/11, SARS, the Great Recession, COVID. I mean, it's just very difficult time.
Yeah, it's actually a miracle that we're still standing. It does say something about the resilience. The ads that catch your eyes, I don't see this anymore, but I know we used to do a piece on this on Canada AM and in other parts of my broadcasting life, which is the best ads out of Europe, which were so fundamentally different than the ads that you see in North America. What is that sensibility difference?
You're talking about the Cannes reels. So every year in Cannes, France, the whole advertising industry comes to compete. And out of that comes a reel of the best ads in the world, which I always loved. Even when I was in university, Pamela, I would go to the Groening board in Toronto just to sit there and watch that reel every year. Well, there's different sensibility in different countries. There's no doubt about it. In France, nudity in advertising, c'est la vie.
Yeah,
and,
not a problem.
And the deep humor of UK advertising is just, they look at advertising in a different way there. They don't pander to the lowest common denominator. They really assume intelligence on most of the UK television work. And therefore the audiences kind of like it. They kind of welcome it. So there's that. When I was judging Cannes, I was a judge there in 2005, which is a very interesting experience. So I was judging radio. So for 3 days, it was like headphones on and listening to ads from around the world. First, you'd hear them in their native language, and then you would hear it in English, so you could understand what was going on. The interesting thing to me was, beyond sensitivities like using profanity or a little bit of nudity or whatever it might be, every country basically did the same kind of advertising. I could even hear a German ad and get the beats of it and then just confirm it with the English. It just had the husband, wife, the monologue announcer. Like Madison Avenue has really permeated the world, with the exception of Japan. Japan's ads were like 3 minutes long, not 30 seconds long, and they were languid, and there'd be just running water for 30 seconds and then 3 words and more running. Like there's no that urgency, that exclamation, that forest of exclamation marks we live with in advertising does not exist in Japan. So that's the one place in the world where advertising is so different.
So, I mean, that's not an attention span thing because they have as much technology as we do.
That's an interesting thing too. Everybody talks about the goldfish attention span that we have, and that, all advertising has to be 5 seconds long, 6 seconds, and I've never bought that. I really believe that if you can tell a great story, people will listen. I mean, movies aren't really have been 2 hours long since the beginning of celluloid. I mean, it really hasn't changed. So I think it's a cop-out. I think if you can create a great, even my show, Pamela, I mean, look, my show is about advertising. And I always kid about this, that it's a show on a network with no advertising. On a network, people flee to avoid advertising.
Correct.
And it's a show about advertising, and it was downloaded 7 million times last year. And I say, why is that? And I really think the answer to that is just because I tell stories.
Yeah.
I think it's not my ability. It's the concept of storytelling that I think works on any level. And people will actually sit down for 27 minutes and listen to a show about advertising if the stories are good.
And then the flip side of that, which you talk about, is that short, sharp sentence that makes all the difference in the world. And you can explain these a little bit, but don't mess with Texas. And then the one that is in all of our minds, it's maybe our age and stage, but the cracked egg saying, here's your brain. And then the egg is cracked and put in the frying pan, and that's your brain on drugs. Yeah. it was so powerful, and
I
it
know.
was a nanosecond.
Well, as with anything, the key is simplicity.
Yeah.
The best advertising in the world is the simplest advertising in the world. I don't mean simplistic. I mean that the idea is not complicated, and that that your brain will fry on drugs. That exact analogy was so powerful. Don't mess with Texas was such a great line. I even tell in that story that when the agency presented that line to the Texas. The Texas folks, they wanted to put please in front of it. Please don't mess with Texas. And the ad agency said, if you do that, you destroy the line and we won't even give it to you. Like, it's got to be, don't mess with Texas. And that line, he as he said too, he said, I could have said, don't litter, keep Texas clean, but don't mess with Texas, just summed it up. And Texas really took that line on as almost like a state slogan.
And it did. It reflects their character, right?
It's the Republic of Texas, they loved it. So the point being that you can have a simple idea in advertising is the best, but then a simple line can do a lot of work, like a great slogan, a great tagline. I never thought I was good at writing great slogans, Pamela. I could come up with interesting ideas. I never thought slogans were my strength, because it's incredibly hard to come up with something that sums up a company or is as sticky as don't mess with Texas when you're only using 5 words or less. It is an art form.
But back to full circle, it does tell a story, because it does capture people's idea of themselves. And they were trying to deal with Texans who, as you said, the babas that were throwing their beer cans out of the windows. And all of a sudden their toughness could be turned to a good purpose. And they bought in. I mean, the rates of littering in Texas just plummeted.
And one of the smart things they did in that particular campaign was one of the first commercials, they got 2 of the big Dallas Cowboy football players to deliver that line, which I think set the tone for that. Right. And everybody just immediately bought into it and loved it.
Yeah. The Super Bowl, which is supposed to be the be all and end all of modern advertising. People spend bazillions of dollars on those ads. And they've changed. They've really changed quite dramatically. You were talking about the 2017 Super Bowl, where the Airbnb ad and a company called 84 Lumber that nobody in the world had ever heard of,
right,
did these ads, which were quite political, which were carrying a message.
Those were the Trump years, right?
Yeah.
So both of those particular ads were commenting on Trump's immigration policy, the building of the wall. So Airbnb, their core mission is strangers meeting strangers. Yeah. That's really what they're all about. Is you go and stay in someone's home that you've never met. That's their raison d'etre. And the same with 84 Lumber, which, really I haven't heard of since, but they took a big chance by, creating a whole storyline of people trying to get through a wall and a family trying to get through.
Create that image for those who didn't see it, because it was a mother and a young daughter, I think.
Yeah.
They come up to the wall, but there's a door in it.
That's right. Because it's a lumber place, they built a wooden door so they could actually get through the wall. It was symbolic, but powerful. I mean, it was one of the most talked about ads on that Super Bowl. And that's what you want with a Super Bowl. You're spending, even the last Super Bowl, Pamela, I think it was $6.5 million for 30 seconds. Now, remember that the advertising itself costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. Could be $750,000 for you're spending almost another $750,000 on just the creative. So it's a lot of money, and you've got the biggest audience in the world. That's what you're paying for. You got 100 million people watching, which no other program delivers. But what you want at the end of the day is people talking about your brand, and 84 Lumber got that.
Yeah. Let's end by just talking for a moment about the influences on you and how you see that affect your life.
I was very fortunate to attend a weekly master class in the use of sound effects many years ago. That tutorial was delivered courtesy of the Coyote and Roadrunner cartoons I watched as a kid. I don't think sound effects have ever been done better or with more humor. And that cartoon was created in the 1950s when technology was a tad more basic than it is now. I loved the ever-inventive Wile E. Coyote and the contraptions he would order from the Acme Corporation, which, by the way, stood for a company that manufactures everything. Those contraptions gave animator genius Chuck Jones a smorgasbord of sound effects possibilities.
When you hear those sound effects, it really is. I mean, talk about the visual imagery that comes from a simple sound, like you can see somebody falling down the cliff, right?
That, the Roadrunner and cartoon and Bugs Bunny was a master class in sound design. And I mean that. I sat there as a kid, fascinated by that. And it has informed my whole career. I mean, as a director of commercials, and I was really, my production company was a sound company. I mean, when a rock falls off a cliff, it makes no sound in reality. But because of the Roadrunner, you'll have to have that whistle. It informed all of our collective consciousness on what does something sound like. And they were so creative with their sounds. I think Treg Brown was the name of the sound designer on all those Warner Brother cartoons. And he was so inventive and so incredible and so funny. I mean, he could make a door open funny, just the sound of a door opening be funny. So that informed my point of view. So when I was, I say to my sound engineer, find me a great door slam. And he'd give me one. I said, that's not funny. And he'd look at me like, how can a door slam be funny? Then we'd go through our sound. I go, that one's funny. I learned that from Roadrunner and the Coyote cartoons.
So you were kind of destined. Obviously, I always think the things that happen in our youth shape us, and we don't know that it's taking us there until we get there and look back. But
so true. So true. I don't even know if I was even conscious of it until well into my career, that when I was quoting my sound effect requirements, that I was really quoting Chuck Jones and all the great work he did.
Isn't that
great? So brilliant.
It's such fun to talk with you, and I mean, I know you have so many listeners on the show and on the podcast under the influence, because there's an endless supply of material. I mean, people often ask me, how do you come up with so many episode ideas? And I really literally have to say that's the easiest part of the show, because my industry and the world at large, it just pumps out so much great material every day, every week, especially in the marketing world. If you look, around the world, the toughest part of my show is research, but the easiest part is the episode themes. There's just so much happening out there. Well, and it's so different now. I mean, the government in Ottawa has hired influencers now to go online and market their message. I mean, everybody's doing it. It's not just big companies selling stuff.
It's so true. Every company is a media company now. Think about it. I mean, prior to social media, you had to buy time on a television station or a radio station or in a magazine. Now it's social media. Every company is a media company now, and every person could be a brand. It's a whole new era.
And we'll do that next time, because I'm going to beg you to come back so we can talk some more about that. Lovely, lovely, lovely to have you on the show. It's great.
Thanks, Pamela. I really enjoyed it. I'll come back anytime.
Okay. So the latest book, because there are others, you'll look them up, is called My Biggest Mistake. And I think it really speaks to people, because we do learn from our mistake. Epic Fails and Silver Linings, Terry O'Reilly. But please find on any podcast outlet anywhere, Under the Influence, because it's a treat to listen to. And yes, there are sound effects. Thanks a lot, Terry.
Thanks, Pamela.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.